I was sitting in a folding chair in a sub-basement hallway at 4 in the morning, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier, watching a door I had propped open 4 inches with a rubber wedge. Inside that room, on a recliner the hospital had bought sometime around 1998, a woman I had never met was asleep under my jacket. She had stopped shaking around 2:30. Her breathing had finally slowed to something that sounded like sleep instead of surrender. The room smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, the way every break room in every hospital in America smells, and the emergency lighting in the hall buzzed at a frequency I'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. Her badge was on the floor by the door. It must have come loose from her coat pocket when I carried her in. I picked it up to set it on the table where she'd find it, and the photo caught the light, and under the photo was a name. Ardell, W. Contractor. Ardell, like the man whose name was on the letterhead of every memo I'd ever received. Like the man who chaired the board of the hospital I'd worked in for 6 years. Like the man who could end my employment with a phone call he'd make between his second and third cup of coffee. I sat back down in that folding chair with her badge in my hand and understood in a very clear and unhurried way that I had made a decision at 1 in the morning that was going to cost me something and that the cost had not yet been calculated. Let me back up. My name is Miles Okafor. I'm 37. I'm a stationary engineer at St. Ambrose Medical Center in Seattle, which is a long way of saying I'm the guy who keeps the building alive. Boilers, chillers, air handlers, medical gas, the pneumatic tube system that shoots specimens up to the lab. If the operating rooms are 70 degrees at 30% humidity at 6 a.m., that's me. If they aren't, that's also me. And there is a phone call. My father was a millwright at an aluminum plant outside Spokane. He came home smelling like cutting oil and cigarettes, and he had a saying he repeated so often it stopped registering as advice and started registering as weather. Write it down. Nobody remembers a thing you did. They remember what's on paper. My mother drove a school bus for 26 years. Between them they raised 3 kids on a combined income that would not cover a mortgage in the city I now live in. I have never once heard either of them describe themselves as struggling. I was married. Her name was Bridget. 6 years together, 4 married, no kids. It didn't end in a fire. It ended in a kitchen, on a Tuesday, over a conversation about whether we wanted to move to Portland, and somewhere in the middle of it we both realized we'd been having the wrong conversation for about 2 years. She's remarried now. I sent a card. I meant it. After the divorce I moved into a 1-bedroom above a laundromat in South Park, which is not a neighborhood people from out of town have heard of. The floors are warm in the winter from the dryers downstairs. Rent is $1,100 a month, which in this city is either a miracle or a crime scene, and I've stopped asking. I work nights by choice. Nights are honest. Nobody's performing at 3 a.m. I bought 2 chairs off a curb on Cloverdale Street, and I glued the wobbly one. I bought a table from a restaurant that went under. I own 1 good pan. This is the part where you're supposed to feel sorry for me, and I'd rather you didn't. I wasn't unhappy, I was just quiet. There's a difference, and I think a lot of men land somewhere between the two and never learn the vocabulary to tell anybody which one they're standing in. Von Ardell had chaired the board of St. Ambrose for 11 years. Before that he was a trauma surgeon for 29, the kind whose name got said in the halls the way you'd say the name of a weather system. He had 2 rules that everybody knew, because he said them at every all-staff meeting. The first was that the hospital does not lie to a family. The second was that if you make a mistake, you write it down before you go home. And if you don't write it down, the mistake isn't the problem anymore, you are. I'd been in a room with him exactly twice in 6 years. Both times he asked me a technical question, listened to the entire answer without interrupting, said thank you and left. I never once saw him smile. The only person at work I'd call a friend was Des Whitaker, who ran the same shift and had been at St. Ambrose 11 years and talked continuously from the moment he clocked in. Des had a theory that I was slowly becoming part of the building's infrastructure and that eventually they'd just paint me and mount me to a wall. He made it his business to text me on my days off. He was and remains a good man in a way he'd be embarrassed to hear out loud. The night everything changed, the wind came in off the sound at 60 miles an hour and took down a transmission line in Tukwila, and about 130,000 households in King County lost power at 12:37 a.m. The hospital's generators picked up in 8 seconds, which is what they're supposed to do. What they are not supposed to do is drop the entire east elevator bank onto emergency lockout. While a car is between floors, elevator 4 faulted at 12:41. I know that because I wrote it down. The alarm panel showed a car stalled between B1 and B2. I took the stairs. From the outside of a stalled elevator you hear one of three things. Nothing, which means empty, talking, which means people are annoyed, or the sound this one was making, which was a woman trying to be quiet and failing. I got on the emergency phone line and told her my name. I told her the car was mechanically fine, that it was sitting on its brakes and not going anywhere, that the building had power, and that I was going to get her out. She said okay. She said okay 4 more times. Then she stopped answering, and I could hear the breathing and I recognized it, because my sister had panic attacks in high school, and it is a sound you don't forget. It took me 31 minutes to reset the controller and hand-wind the car down to B2. I talked the whole time, which is not like me. I told her about the wind. I told her the boiler in this building was older than both of us. I told her the difference between a chiller and a compressor, which nobody has ever wanted to know, and she laughed once, thin and cracked, and then went quiet again. When the doors opened she was on the floor of the car with her back against the corner and her knees against her chest, and she had been crying so long there was nothing left of it, just the dry aftershock. Charcoal gray coat, hands filthy black, and I thought it was blood before I understood it was graphite. She'd been holding a pencil when the car stopped, and she had crushed it in her fist. She tried to stand and her legs weren't ready. I caught her under the arm. She was cold in a way that concerned me more than the crying, because the car had been sitting for half an hour with no air handling and the Saab basement runs about 58 degrees year-round. I said I'd call 911. She grabbed my sleeve. She said please don't. I told her that was not really her call, because it was a medical event and I'm not a doctor. She said I'm not hurt. I have panic disorder. I've had this 100 times. If you call them, there's a record, and my father will. And then she stopped, and she looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since, which was the look of somebody who has just handed you a piece of information she'd rather have kept. I want to be precise about what happened next, because later it got told in a way that removed all of it. I walked her to the stairwell landing and sat her down, and I called the emergency department on the house phone. The charge nurse picked up on the 9th ring. There had been a metro bus into a light pole on Airport Way when the signals went dark. 14 patients, she said, and I'm paraphrasing but not much, that unless my person was blue I should keep them warm, keep them talking and stop calling. I asked the woman where her car was. Third-party lot on Corson, and she'd been in the building since 7 that evening, and the lot tows at midnight, and her purse was in the car, and her phone had died at 9, and no, her charger didn't fit mine, because she had the newer one, and I have never once in my life owned the newer one. I called security. The security desk phone rang into nothing, because half the low-voltage systems in that building were still coming back up and would be until dawn. I asked her if there was anybody I could call. I said I would walk to a phone and call anyone she named. Sister, roommate, anybody. She said no. She said, there's nobody I want to see me like this, so I want to be clear about the arithmetic, because I ran it 8 or 9 times standing in that stairwell. Emergency department, closed to me. Security, unreachable. Police, she was not a crime, and I have some feelings about calling police on a woman having a panic attack. Lobby, locked down for the outage, staffed by one contract guard who I'd never met. Sending her out into a 60-mile-an-hour windstorm at 1 in the morning with no phone, no wallet, no car and no coat that was actually warm, or the staff break room on B2, way 40 feet away, which had a recliner, a blanket in the cabinet, a working coffee maker, and a door that unlocked from the inside. I picked the room. I'd pick it again. But I knew, standing there with her arm over my shoulder, exactly how a hallway camera would render the next 19 seconds, and I remember thinking, in the dumb flat way you think about weather, this is going to be a problem someday. Here's what I did in order, and here's what I wrote in the maintenance log, because my father raised me, and because it was 1:22 in the morning and I had nothing else to Fort 1, car 4 fault, gen transfer, occupant inside, single female, contractor badge, 0109. Hand-lowered car to B2. Occupant extracted, ambulatory, no visible injuries. Reports panic disorder, MCI in progress, advised keep warm, Curidex, no answers. 0118. Occupant moved to B2 staff break room, door wedged open, blanket water heat on. 0122. I will remain in corridor for observation. M. Okafor. Then I got a folding chair from the supply closet, and I sat down in the hallway with the door open 4 inches. Because the first thing they teach you in the 16-hour first aid course. the hospital makes you take every 2 years is that a person who has been hyperventilating for 40 minutes can vomit in their sleep. And if they're on their back, that's how people die in movies and occasionally in real life. I needed to hear her. That's the whole reason. It wasn't chivalry. I've read what people say about men who sleep on floors, and I understand the skepticism. I sat in a chair in a hallway because I needed to be able to hear a stranger breathe. Around 2, she called out. I stood in the doorway without going in and asked if she wanted water. She said no. She asked if I was still there. I said I was. She said, "You're going to be out here all night." I said, "I'm on shift till 7 anyway." She said, "That's not the same thing and you know it." And then she was asleep. I tore the back off a work order slip and wrote 5 lines and slid it under the water bottle on the table where she'd find it before she found me. "You're safe. This is the B2 staff room." The door unlocks from inside. I'm in the hall. Miles, at 6:40 I heard the recliner, then footsteps, then a long silence, which was her reading the slip, and then she came out into the hallway holding it, wearing my jacket, hair on one side pressed flat, black graphite, still ground into the creases of her right hand. "Miles," she said, testing it. I nodded. "You slept out here." "I sat out here." She looked at the folding chair. She looked at the wedge in the door. She looked at me for long enough that I looked at the floor. "Nothing happened," I said, "because somebody had to say it, and it was better if it was me. You were cold and you couldn't breathe and there was nowhere to put you. Your badge is on the table. I didn't go through your coat. I found it on the floor." She glanced away and I watched her decide, in real time, whether to lie about the name. "So you know," she said. "I know your father's name is on the building." "Not on the building," she said. "On the letterhead. He's very particular about the difference." She almost smiled. She said, "Most people would have made a call, just to get me off their hands. Just so I'd be somebody else's problem by 2 a.m. I said, "Every call I could make, I made." She stood there with that slip of paper in her hand for a while. Then she said, "I'm going to go find my car. It's in an impound lot on 4th. You looked it up. There's only one they use." She took off my jacket and folded it and set it on the folding chair, and she said, "Please don't tell anybody," and she went up the stairs. And I picked up the crushed pencil off the floor of the break room and put it in my shirt pocket without deciding to, the way you pick up a screw you find on a job site. I thought that was the end of it. 3 days later, Des slapped a work order on my bench and said, "Chairman's kid is in the building." I said, "Which one?" "He's got the one," Des said. "The artist. Her name was Wren. She drew hearts, not the shape, the organ. She was a certified medical illustrator, which is a real profession with a real accreditation that I had never heard of until that week, and St. Ambrose had contracted her to produce the anatomical plates for the new cardiac pavilion, the donor book, the wall installations, the teaching atlas. 12 months of work. She'd asked for a studio in the building instead of working from home because she wanted to be near the specimens and the surgical suites. Her studio was on B2, 40 feet from the break room. She came down to the shop that first week under a reasonable pretext. She wanted to know how the pneumatic tube system worked, because she was drawing a cutaway of the pavilion for the donor materials, and she wanted the mechanical guts to be right, not decorative, so I walked her through it. Then she wanted to see the steam tunnels. Then she wanted to know why the old boiler was still there if we didn't use it, and I told her the truth, which is that no body had ever budgeted the asbestos abatement to remove it, so it just sits there like a dead whale. And she laughed hard enough that Des looked up from his lunch. She came back the next week, and the one after. She'd sit on the stool at the end of my bench with a sketchbook, and she'd draw while I rebuilt a pump seal, and she'd ask questions that were too specific to be small talk. "What does that noise mean? Why is that pipe painted yellow? How do you know when something is about to fail?" And I'd answer, and she'd write it in the margin of a drawing of somebody's aorta. The trust between us got built out of things nobody else would have looked at twice. Her drafting lamp was junk. Articulated arm, tension spring shot, so the head drooped about an inch every 10 minutes, and she'd been holding it up with a stack of textbooks and a binder clip. I saw it once. That night after she went home, I took the arm apart on my bench, found the spring stretched past yield, cut a new one from stock, and reset the tension. Took 40 minutes. It's the kind of thing I do to keep from thinking. The next morning there was a sticky note on my toolbox. "The lamp holds. You fix things." I read it twice, and I put it in the drawer with the crushed pencil, and I did not understand yet that she was not talking about the lamp. She brought coffee for the whole shop one Friday. 6 cups. Everybody's the same except mine, which had exactly the amount of half and half I use, which is an amount that Des has publicly described as a war crime. She didn't say anything about it, she just handed it to me. I stood there holding it like it was a subpoena. She asked Des, not me, whether I ever took vacation. She stood at the back of the shop one afternoon while I explained a valve schematic to a first-year apprentice, and when I looked up she wasn't looking at the schematic. And one evening in February we were the last 2 people on B2. Everybody upstairs, cafeteria closed, the whole floor down to the sound of the air handlers, and she was sitting on the counter in the break room with her shoes off and a cold cup of coffee in both hands, and she told me about Preston Hale. Preston was a cardiothoracic fellow at St. Ambrose. He was also the son of the family whose name is carved into the entrance of the Hale Pavilion, which is the only building on that campus with a marble anything. Their fathers had known each other since residency. He and Wren had been together 2 years. She said it had never really been a relationship. She said it had been an arrangement that everybody around them found so convenient that objecting to it would have been rude. He never hit her. I want to say that because she said it, and because she said it with a bitterness I didn't understand until she explained it. He never hit her, so there was never anything to point at. He had her location shared on his phone and framed it as safety. He'd decide which of her friends were bad for her, one at a time, over 18 months. So gradually that she couldn't identify the day it happened. He read her email because they were a team. When she got the St. Ambrose contract, he told her people would say she got it because of her father, and then he said it again a month later, and again, until she believed it, and then he told her he'd defend her from the people saying it. You spend 2 years being described, she said, and one day you notice you don't have any words of your own left. She ended it the day of the windstorm. 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the parking garage of the Hale Pavilion, and he had smiled at her the entire time she said it, and told her to call him when she was calm. She went to her studio that night to clear it out. She was going to quit the contract and leave the building and let everybody assume whatever they wanted. And then the lights went out, she said, and the elevator stopped, and I sat down on the floor, and I thought, this is what my whole life is. I'm in a box, and no one's coming. She turned the coffee cup in her hands, and then some guy started explaining boilers to me through a speaker. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything worth putting next to that. A week later, Von Ardell's assistant called down to the shop and said the chairman wanted to see me about the pavilion's mechanical commissioning schedule. We talked about the schedule for 20 minutes. He knew more about the air handling requirements for a hybrid OR than I expected a retired surgeon to know. Then I stood up to leave and he took his glasses off and set them on the desk. Mr. Okafor, he said, I keep this building and family in separate rooms. It's the only way I've ever been able to do either job. I expect the same from everyone who works here. He didn't say her name. He didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't have to. It was like watching a man lay a single brick and then leave so you understand the wall is coming, I said. Understood, sir, and I meant it. I stayed out of the studio wing for 3 weeks. Wren still came down to the shop and I answered her questions, and I did not ask her any, and I could see her noticing, and I could see her deciding not to force it, and both of those hurt in a way I couldn't have justified to anybody. Des, chewing a sandwich. You know she's down here 4 times a week. She's drawing the tube system. Miles, the tube system's been drawn. I changed the subject. That night I sat in my apartment above the laundromat, with the floor warm under my feet and a beer I didn't drink, and I asked myself what exactly I was doing, and I did not come up with an answer I liked. One evening in March I was walking out to the employee lot and she fell into step beside me. The garage was empty. Our footsteps came back off the concrete. She said, "Why didn't you just leave me in the stairwell? You'd have gotten cold. That's not an answer." I stopped walking, I said. "You asked me not to call anybody. So I stayed where I could hear you. That's all it was." She looked at me for a long time, long enough that a normal person would have laughed and broken it. "That's not all it was," she said. Then she got in her car and drove away, and I stood in the garage for a while under a light that flickers at 118 volts and that I have never fixed. Preston Hale came back into the building on a Tuesday in April for the groundbreaking ceremony of the pavilion's second phase. Hard hats, gold shovels, a photographer. He was tall and clean-shaven, and he shook everybody's hand, including mine. He had that specific ease that comes from never once in 31 years, having been told no by anybody who could enforce it. He asked what I did. I told him. He said, "So you're the reason the oars work," in a way that made it sound like a compliment and land like a coin dropped in a cup. Then he saw Ren at the end of the shop standing at my bench with her sketchbook open, and something went across his face and was gone before anyone else in the room registered it. I registered it. He had not come for a groundbreaking, and the weapon he chose was not a lie. I want to be very clear about that, because for a long time I expected him to lie, and I had prepared myself for a lie, and I had no defense at all against what he actually did. He used the truth. He just took everything out of it that made it human. It started outside Vaughn's office on the 4th floor. I wasn't there. I heard the shape of it later from Des, who was in the corridor waiting to badge a service elevator, and from Ren, much later, who heard it through her father. What Des said he heard was Preston's voice, pitched a little louder than a private conversation needs to be. "Did you know one of your engineers had Ren alone in a locked sub-basement for 6 hours, door closed, middle of the night?" Every word of that is true. The building was in emergency lockout. It was 6 hours. It was the middle of the night. He didn't mention the elevator. He didn't mention the windstorm, the bus crash, the dead phone, the towed car, the panic attack, the water bottle, the blanket, the folding chair in the corridor, or the note. He didn't need to. Those words in that order do all the damage by themselves. The context wasn't refuted. It was amputated. That afternoon he found me by the loading dock. He had a phone in his hand and he turned it toward me, and it was 19 seconds of hallway camera footage from B2. Grainy, no audio. Me with my arm around a woman's waist, her weight against me, walking her through a doorway, AM. "You understand what that looks like," he said, conversational, almost kind. "I do, you do, and so will everyone who sees it." I said nothing. I want to tell you I said something devastating. I stood there with my jaw locked hard enough to feel my back teeth and my hands flat against my thighs, and I said nothing. Because I'd already watched him take a true sentence and cut the meaning out of it, and anything I said would just be more raw material. Every word I didn't say that afternoon is still in my chest somewhere. I can feel the shape of them. Vaughn called me in at 4. The clip was paused on his laptop, frozen on the frame where my hand is on her waist. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier. He was a father looking at 19 seconds of evidence confirming the worst thing he could imagine, and trying with everything he had to hold his verdict for one more minute. He said one word. "Explain." So I did, all of it. The fault at 12:41, the hand wind, the panic disorder and her refusal, the bus crash, the charge nurse, the security phone, the impound lot, the break room, the wedge in the door, the chair in the hallway, the note. Nothing happened, I said. Nothing was ever going to happen. I didn't know who she was until I picked her badge up off the floor, and by then she was already asleep. He sat with it. The silence went on so long I became aware of the ventilation in his ceiling, which was, I noticed, with the useless part of my brain undersized. He said, "I'll ask my daughter." "You should," I said. The next morning I was reassigned to the Rainier Annex, a clinic and storage facility 30 miles south to run a boiler retrofit that had been sitting in the capital plan for 4 years. Not fired, not disciplined, moved. Des called me on my second day down there. "You got exiled," he said. "Yeah, for what?" "For 19 seconds, I said, and hung up, because I didn't trust my voice. Here's what I did not see, because I was 30 miles away, and there's no version of this where I pretend otherwise. I did not see Ren walk into her father's office that afternoon and close the door. I did not hear what she said. Des told me the door was closed for 40 minutes, and that when she came out, her eyes were red and her back was straight, and she walked past him without seeing him. Everything else I know about that conversation, I know because Ren told me later, sitting on the floor of my kitchen, and I'm going to tell it to you in the place where I actually learned it, because that's the only honest way to do this. Preston found me one more time. He drove all the way down to the Rainier Annex, which I understood as its own kind of statement, and he was leaning on his car in the gravel lot when I came out at 6. "She'll get tired of you," he said. He checked his watch while he said it, which I thought was a nice touch. "She always does. It's not personal." I looked at him. I got in my truck. I started it. I drove out of that lot without saying a single word, and my hands shook the whole way up I-5, not out of fear, but out of the pure physical exhaustion of holding a thing in your mouth that badly wants out. 4 days later, an inter-office envelope arrived at the annex, forwarded from B2, addressed in handwriting. Inside was a crushed graphite pencil, not the one I'd kept, a different one, snapped clean in half, and a slip of paper with 5 words on it. "I'm not losing this one." She wasn't talking about the pencil. I sat down on a milk crate in a boiler room in Kent and read those 5 words maybe 11 times. and something behind my ribs that had been clenched for a month let go about a quarter of an inch. Then 2 weeks of nothing. She didn't call. She didn't text. I didn't reach out, because Vaughn had drawn a line and I am not a man who steps over lines, and because some part of me, the part that grew up in a house where you don't make a scene, believed that if I just did the work and kept my mouth shut, the world would eventually get around to being fair. So I ran conduit. I priced burners. I ate lunch alone in a truck in a gravel lot, and I thought about her more or less continuously, which is a thing I'd have denied under oath at the time. Then on a Thursday in May the buzzer went off in my apartment above the laundromat, and I opened the door, and she was standing on the landing in an old hoodie with her hair down and no makeup, holding a paper bag from the faux place 3 blocks over on Cloverdale. "I figured you eat alone," she said. "I do too. I have 2 chairs. I found them on a curb. The wobbly one is glued and it's the one I take, so guests get the good one." We sat at the table I bought from a dead restaurant, and we ate pho out of the containers because I don't own enough bowls, and the dryers ran downstairs and made the floor warm, and for about 10 minutes neither of us said anything real. Then she told me about her father's office. She said she told him everything. Not the version. The whole thing. Preston, all of it. The location sharing and the friends and the emails, 2 years of it laid out on his desk like an X-ray. And then that night the windstorm, the elevator, the man in the hallway. "He didn't interrupt me," she said. "Not once. My father has interrupted me my entire life, and he sat there for 40 minutes and let me finish." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Why didn't you tell me?'" She looked at her hands. "And I said, 'Because you keep the building and the family in separate rooms.'" She set her chopsticks down across the top of the container, very carefully, and lined them up, and I watched her do it, and understood that something else was coming. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and you're going to be angry." I put mine down too. "That night in the elevator," she said, "I knew who you were. I didn't understand. I said so. In November," she said, "I was up on PEDS doing gesture studies. There was a kid in the hallway, maybe 9, wheelchair, and the front caster was shot. It kept catching and spinning him into the wall, and he was trying not to cry about it in front of his mother. And a maintenance guy came around the corner with a bucket, and he crouched down and looked at it for about 5 seconds, and he had it apart. He didn't say anything to the kid. He just fixed it and told him to try it, and the kid rolled straight, and the mother turned around to say thank you, and the guy was already gone." She looked up. "I went to the staff directory that afternoon and I typed in every word I could think of until I found your photo. I sat there. I asked for a studio on B2, she said. There were 3 offices available upstairs with windows. I asked for the one on the same floor as the shop. I told them it was about proximity to the specimen lab. Ren, I'm not finished." Her voice was steady but her hands weren't. "That night, the night of the storm, I'd cleared out the studio, everything was in boxes. And I got to the top of the stairs, and I turned around and came back down. Because I'd made you something. I'd drawn the tube system, the whole cutaway. The thing you spent 2 hours explaining to a woman you thought was just a contractor, and I was going to leave it on your bench with a note. And I lost my nerve in the hallway, so I got in the elevator to leave. The dryers ran downstairs. I got stuck in that elevator," she said, "because I turned back for you. I don't remember what my face did. So you can be angry," she said. "You held me up in a hallway and slept in a chair for a woman you thought was a stranger, and I let you think that for 4 months. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sit at this table and let you believe any part of that night was random. It wasn't. I came looking for you. I just did it very badly." I looked at the 2 curb chairs and the glued leg and the faux going cold, and I said the only true thing available to me, which was, "If we do this, your father can end my career with a phone call." She didn't blink. "If my father ends a man for being decent to me," she said, "then that's a fact about my father. It isn't a fact about you." I did not kiss her that night. We washed 2 containers and 1 pan at a sink barely wide enough for both of us, shoulders touching and not touching, and she left a little after 11. At the door she turned around. "I left the pencil on your shelf," she said, "on purpose. Here is the part I didn't know for another 3 weeks, and I only know it now because Von Ardell told me himself, at a diner on Rainier Avenue, over a patty melt. When Preston sent that clip, he didn't request it through the security office. Requesting it would have generated a form, and a form would have generated a reason, and he did not have a reason. What he did was walk into the security suite with a Hale Pavilion donor badge and ask a 19-year-old contract officer to pull B2 corridor footage for him, and the kid did it, because of the last name. That's a policy violation. It's also when the footage involves a person in a medical crisis on hospital property, considerably worse than a policy violation, and on the other side of the scale was a maintenance log. 041 car for fault. 0109 occupant extracted refuses EMS. 0114 ED contacted, MCI in progress. 0118 break room, door wedged open. 0122 I will remain in corridor for observation. Typed into a work order system at 22 in the morning by a man who had no idea anyone would ever read it, about a woman whose last name he didn't know yet. Vaughn read the log before he read the email. He told me that at the diner, and then he ate a French fry, and then he said the sentence I'll be carrying around for the rest of my life. 19 seconds of video and 4 lines of text described the same event, he said. One of them was written by a man who thought nobody was watching. That's the only piece of evidence in the world I actually trust. He put his glasses back on. I don't like this, he said. I want to be extremely clear. I don't like it. I didn't want it. And if you hurt her, I will use every relationship I have accumulated in 40 years to make sure you never work in a hospital in this state again. He picked up his coffee, but you wrote it down, so. That's where we are. He never gave a blessing. He never called me son. He said he respected the record, and standing where I was standing, that was more than enough. Preston sent the clip one more time, in August, to Vaughn's personal email, with 2 paragraphs recommending the hospital reconsider my employment. Vaughn forwarded it to me the same afternoon. In the body of the message he had written 4 words: handled, finish the plant. The credentialing committee opened a review into the security access. It wasn't loud. There was no confrontation, no scene, nobody wept in a hallway. It was a series of forms, and then a letter, and by October Preston Hale had taken a fellowship in another state, and the last I heard he tells the story as though he chose to leave. Maybe he believes it. He was destroyed by the exact instrument he'd tried to use on me, a factual record, read carefully by a man who was not in a hurry. I finished the central plant recommissioning for the cardiac pavilion in November. 14 months of work, 4 chillers, a new steam header, a control sequence I rewrote 3 times. At the dedication, they read the names of the surgeons and the donors, and then Von Ardell stepped up to the microphone and said that the building would be full of people making the most important decisions of their lives, and that none of it worked without the people in the basement, and he said my name into the microphone, and 400 people in a tent applauded a stationary engineer. Wren was standing next to her father. She didn't wave. She just looked at me across all those folding chairs with an expression that nobody else in that tent could have read, and I could, because she'd been saying it since February in sticky notes and coffee with the right amount of half and half. I see you. I chose you. I'm not going anywhere. A year after the windstorm, she moved in. Not to the house on Queen Anne with the view of the Sound and the guest suite over the garage. To the 1-bedroom above a laundromat in South Park, where the floors are warm in the winter and the kitchen isn't wide enough for 2 people to pass without turning sideways. She came up the stairs on a Saturday with 3 suitcases and a portfolio case and the pencil. I stood in the doorway and heard myself say, "You're leaving a house on Queen Anne for this." She walked to the shelf by the door and set the pencil down and squared it up with 2 fingers. "You keep saying I'm giving something up," she said. I'm not giving anything up. I'm putting something down." When the hospital replaced the furniture in the B2 break room, I asked what they were doing with the recliner, and the answer was a dumpster, and so it came home in the bed of my truck. It's in the corner of the living room now, by the window. It's ugly. The upholstery is the color of hospital pudding. She reads in it on Sunday evenings with her feet tucked under her and the city going amber outside, in the same chair where she once slept, freezing, in a coat that wasn't warm enough, 40 feet from a man she had turned back for and lost her nerve about. Same chair, same frame, same broken lever, same wheeze when you lean back too fast. Everything else in the universe rearranged. Last month I was on my back under the kitchen sink with a wrench, fixing a drip that had been going for 11 days because I'd been at work. She leaned on the counter above me with a cup of tea. "You still fix things," she said. I said, "It's the job." She was quiet for a second. "No," she said, "it's what you are when nobody's looking. The job just pays you for it." I think about that night more than I probably should. I sit in that ugly recliner sometimes when she's not home, and I go back to the man in the folding chair in the corridor, holding a badge with a name on it that meant the end of everything. 4 in the morning, cold coffee, a door propped 4 inches with a rubber wedge. Every instinct I had was telling me to get up. "This isn't yours, Miles. Go call somebody. Go clock out. In the morning it'll be like it never happened, but I stayed long enough to put a blanket over her. I stayed long enough to write 4 lines in a log that nobody was ever supposed to read. I stayed long enough to sit in a hallway all night so a woman I'd never met could sleep without being afraid. That's it. That's the whole, not one heroic act in the entire story. I have never run into a burning building. I have never saved anybody's life. I fixed an elevator and I sat in a chair, and it turned out that a life is mostly made of things that small, and that most people leave the room about 90 seconds before they'd have found that out. She came into my life disguised as somebody who needed a place to be safe. I gave her a broken recliner and a hallway. She gave me back a life I didn't know I'd stopped living. If you've ever stayed when everything in you said to walk out, I want to hear about it. Put it in the comments. Because I read all of them, and stories like that are the only reason I keep telling these. Hit the like button if this one got you somewhere, and subscribe, because there's a new one every week. And be honest with me. If it had been you in that basement at 1 in the morning, a stranger who couldn't breathe, no phone, no ride, a storm outside, and a camera in the hallway watching every second of it, would you have opened that break room door? Or would you have gone back upstairs and let somebody else be the one who stayed?